Well, good afternoon. We're excited to have you here with us today for today's webinar with our partner Intellisys. My name is Lisa Rodriguez with Greg Communications, and I will be your host this afternoon. Please let us know if you have any issues seeing our screen or any audio issues as we go along. The webinar is being recorded, and we will provide a link of the recording to all the registrants afterward. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can either jot them down for the open Q&A session where you'll be able to unmute and verbalize your question, or you can also submit your question using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring those and we'll be sure to answer your questions submitted that way as well. So let's go ahead and get started. If we can move forward, John, to the first slide, the agenda. So on today's call, we hope to clarify the question, why cloud communications, and hope to give you some good information so that you leave feeling pretty well equipped with the basics of the differences between cloud and premise-based systems, what features unified communications offers, as well as a pretty good grip on the financial aspects of premise versus cloud, Capex versus Opex. And we will also have a Q&A time as mentioned. Next slide, please. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Greg Communications, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us and what we do. So Greg Communications has been in business for over 50 years in the Chicagoland area. We do have an outstanding reputation for customer satisfaction as evidenced by our NPS score, which means Net Promoter Score of over 93%. The NPS score is driven by our customers' opinions of our service, our efficiency, and our knowledge. So we've got a great team here at Greg. Our sales reps average tenure is about 20 plus years, which I think is kind of unusual these days. So with those many years of experience in the industry, our team is well equipped to suggest options that fit your business's particular needs. So one of our wonderful partners that we are honored to work with is Intellisys. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our partners on the line with us today, Tom Laguerre and John Themis with Intellisys. And they will give you some of their background and then provide the rest of the presentation. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Lisa. This is Tom Laguerre. Hello. Thank you for joining today. Like Lisa mentioned, Intellisys is an engineering partner to Greg Communications. So Greg Communications has been providing great service in the communications space and a wealth of great products for many years. And Intellisys is really a cloud resource company. So as technologies move to the cloud for unified communications or contact centers or cloud compute or even network functions and security. That's the kind of services we have been helping with for decades. I am the director of the solutions engineering team. I just don't play an engineer on paper. I actually am one from the Midwest here as a cheesehead at the University of Wisconsin. So very glad to be here today and to be in Illinois, where I do reside now, and MBA from the University of Minnesota. And I did want to give John Themis the credit for today's presentation, and he's up next. John is our solutions engineer covering the Midwest territory. But just a note about our team that partners with Greg Communications, we are coast to coast. We have engineers and resources from New England all the way to California, and we cover all the territories. So when you are a large company and you have a lot of locations, or even if your headquarters is in somewhere outside of the Midwest, we have the engineering expertise and technical assistance to help you. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll let John Themis run with it from here, who is our solutions engineer in the Midwest. John, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and get started. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom and Lisa. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Themis. I am your Midwest solutions engineer. I'm actually based in the Cheesehead state of Wisconsin, so just a little bit farther north of Chicago. You can see from my experience here that I've got a fair amount of experience in compute infrastructure, data center, end user, and kind of everything in between. Actually have been on both sides of the sales fence. So I was an IT operations manager for about 15 years prior to coming into the sales engineering role that I'm currently here. So as Tom said, I am your local solutions engineer, and I will be the one leading the session this morning. So hopefully you enjoy. So as we talked about, this is really a conversation about unified communications and looking at the positives of cloud-based communications. But we do want to do a little bit of a recap just so everybody's on the same page and understands the difference between both premise-based and hosted unified communications. So what does it mean to have a premise-based unified communication solution? Well, you can see here on the slide, essentially what it means is all of the intelligence or all of the hardware and components that make the unified communication solution work are all based on that customer's premise. So within their building or subset of buildings somehow. So there's two different basic types of on-premise solutions. There's the server-based solutions, which Cisco, Mitel, Avaya are some examples of those types of solutions. And then there's the traditional PBX. So if you're used to seeing kind of a gray box on a board, you know, with some punch down blocks and things like that connected to it, that's going to be your PBX-based or traditional style on-premise unified communications. So Nortel, NEC, Toshiba, Panasonic are just some examples of those types of solutions. So then when we move to a hosted type solution, we're looking at basically the system is completely residing in a cloud of some sort. So whether that be a AWS cloud or even potentially in a private hosted cloud in somebody's data center outside of that customer that's ultimately being served by that PBX or that unified communications solution. Some examples of those are 8x8, Ring Central, Vonage, and others in that space that essentially do that hosted communication stack. And really, when we talk about hosted, that means that it is fully managed by whoever that vendor is. So essentially, instead of having local folks on site that are managing and maintaining your premise-based PBX, the hosting provider will actually be installing, configuring, managing, and maintaining that solution moving forward. So to go into a little bit of what makes up a unified communications technology stack, when you're looking at a UC platform on its own, essentially you're looking at something that's giving you voice capability, also providing you some sort of video capability, and then a presence or chat type function, and also collaboration. So whether that be through web or audio or shared document storage, that's really what makes up a unified communications platform. Some of the old school PBX solutions obviously didn't have all of those components included in them. They were simply just a phone system that allowed you to call, and maybe if you were lucky, have video calling capability on your phone as well. But unified communication has really bridged the gap and added all of those technology components together into one communications platform that allow you to have, as we say in the industry, kind of an omni-channel type experience where you can reach out and talk with your either other coworkers or people outside your company in multiple different platforms. To add on top of the unified communications component, there's the call or contact center, which is becoming more and more prevalent in today's business. It used to be call centers or contact centers were really, you know, you're talking about large outbound calling companies that are either taking calls or doing outbound calls, and that's all they did all day long. And, you know, maybe they had 50 or 100 or 200 or more people within a particular area that were doing nothing but making and maybe receiving those calls from a service perspective, or, you know, potentially even other verticals like payment acceptance or other things like that. Today, we're actually seeing more and more smaller contact center type environments because of all of the metrics that come from a call center platform. We're seeing smaller groups, can be as small as 5 or 10 or 15 people in a call center type solution. That the reason that they're utilizing that platform is, again, because of all of the different metrics available. You can see the different kind of call process. You can actually do some recording and other things like that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. You can also get a better understanding in real time how those call agents are actually interacting with your customers. There's different platforms or different types of contact center availability or solutions today. As you can see in the listing there, multimodal, omni-channel. Basically what that means is that your call center agents can have multiple different platforms that they can communicate with your end customer. And again, whether that is a customer that's buying something, that's calling in for support, that is, potentially calling in to, even sell a product, you have the ability to not only be able to talk to them on the phone, see them through video, potentially chat with them real time, and also see some of the history of maybe some previous transactions with that particular customer or group or company. Workforce optimization and management, again, that goes into having the visibility into seeing what your call operators are actually doing with your customers. You can actually hear real-time phone calls. You can participate in them. They can be recorded, and you can review them later. There's also artificial intelligence components that can play a part in keeping tabs on what exactly the performance of your call operators are doing on a daily basis. On top of that stack, you have application integration. So you can actually have real-time ties into your CRM or your ERP or other database type solutions that may have that customer data or may have, for example, data on the products that you're buying or selling. You can have real-time ties into those systems so that when you're not doing multiple inputs into different systems as you're going through the sales process or the service process with those systems. You're actually entering data into your call center or unified communications platform, and that ties directly into those other platforms, and that data is being replicated out there so you're not duplicating efforts. And then obviously Microsoft Teams is a huge collaboration platform. If you're not using Teams today, you probably know somebody that does. It's a huge, widely used communications platform that's gaining more and more user base all the time. And again, allows you to collaborate, communicate, and tie into those unified communications platforms. And then there's a host of other plugins that you can add, whether that's call recording, mobility with mobile devices, faxing capabilities so that you can receive and send faxes on the fly, all from within that solution. So I'll pause there for a second to see if there's any questions or concerns on anything that we've covered so far.
I don't have anything in the chat for you.
And I would just like to interject a comment. There's so much more when people think about moving a phone system from premise to cloud and what's the right move for my company, that it's rarely just about the dial tone anymore and the DID numbers. There's a whole host of what truly unified communications means that goes into that equation for that ROI or the TCO, total cost of ownership. So I'll go back to you, John.
And that's actually an awesome segue into our next topic. So we've talked obviously a little bit about what unified communications is, what parts and pieces of the platform are being utilized most often in today's unified communications platforms. But we can look at here some of the different aspects or positives and negatives of each platform. So from a hosted platform versus a premise-based platform, in most cases, your premise-based platform is going to have a single point of failure. You have one PBX, or you have one server, or you have one piece of hardware that's running that phone system. Now, there is the possibility that you could have HA set up where you've got a backup and a primary, but for the most part, those premise-based solutions have that single point of failure. Whereas with a hosted platform, you're really looking at a large install that has N+1 or potentially even N+2 or more type of install base where you have a primary, you have a fallback. Again, it's hosted by a company that has this infrastructure in a data center in the cloud. They have SLAs around uptime and things like that. From a technology obsolescence perspective, the downside of a premise-based platform is that you're purchasing the hardware and you're installing it. So as that technology ages, you have to keep up with the latest updates, whether that's software or hardware or other components within the system. Whereas with a hosted platform, that's taken care of for you. The hosting services are always going to make sure that the solutions are latest and greatest technology. They update all of the hardware components on the back end. It doesn't affect you from a usability perspective. And it takes that concern out of your whole hosted or unified communication solution concerns. From a Capex perspective, generally when you're buying a premise-based solution, you're going to pay a large capital expenditure when you purchase that hardware, and also when you're going through the technology upgrades as they age out. Generally, with a hosted platform, you're not paying much from a Capex perspective. You may pay a little bit for either setup or configuration, or if it's a dedicated solution to you, there may be some Capex component, but it's not going to be anywhere near the type of Capex requirement that you would pay with an on-premise solution. From a telco spend perspective, obviously, you're going to have a lower telco spend on a premise-based system because you have fixed lines into your business. The only real telco spend you're going to be incurring is any kind of outbound calling, whether that's long distance or outbound calling volume. But most everything, again, is residing within your facility. So if you're making internal calls, that's all kind of built into the networking within your building. Whereas, again, a hosted platform is going to be remote from your location, so there will be some telco spend to get the network communication between your premise and that cloud-based solution. From an administration standpoint, obviously premise-based is going to be administered by either on-site employees or contractors or somebody else that you're going to have to pay for to do that day-to-day care and feeding of that solution. With a hosted platform, that's all included in your monthly cost. So any requirements any administration requirements that are needed are done by that provider. It's not a per base or per administration cost. It's included in that monthly recurring charge that you get with that solution. And from a TCO standpoint, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got some TCO calculators or some some of those, some examples of some TCO calculators. But really, when you look at it from a total cost of ownership perspective, it's much lower on the hosted side because, again, you're not paying for all of the hardware, the licensing, the maintenance, and things like that. So some of the factors to consider from a technology perspective and really a spend perspective are these 7 pillars here. So actually, yeah, 7 pillars. From a data center perspective. So you have to look at some of the soft and hard costs that are included in supporting a data center. So is that data center within an existing building that you have, or is it something that you purchased and it's just a standalone data center? What kind of real estate costs are involved in that? From a server procurement standpoint, what kind of costs are involved in either that server procurement or PBX procurement, depending on the type of solution that you're using on premise? How about maintenancing and licensing, deployment and configuration? All of these things factor into what it would cost to actually provide that data center and that hardware on your premise. Then you can look at IT staff. So do you have dedicated people that are working on essentially just care and feeding of your PBX? Do you have maybe some older telecom folks that are coming close to retirement and it's harder and harder to find telecom people today because, quite honestly, telecom is kind of boring. Sorry, Tom, no disrespect, but a lot of folks that are coming out of school these days are not interested in learning telecom. So finding good quality staff to be able to support your on-premise type solution is more and more difficult these days. On top of training and management and all of the other components that go into that IT staff cost, those are things that you need to consider when you're looking at a premise versus hosted solution. And then from a deployment standpoint, again, you have a situation where maybe you've got an existing PBX, you want to put a new one in, there's time to configure and install and cut over and make sure all of the pieces and parts are working in sync with that on-premise system. Whereas with a hosted solution, it's really very easy. It's a cutover on the back end, maybe an hour downtime, you know, depending on the provider and what is already in place. If you've got a UC solution in place today or a cloud-based and you're doing an upgrade or changing to another vendor, it can be much more simple and timely to do that deployment and migration than if you have those components on site. Some of the UC providers offer flexible billing options, whether that's monthly billing or an annual billing or other options that fit within your business requirements. Some of those things can be negotiated upon the time of contract. So the disadvantage, obviously, with an on-premise type solution is you have to purchase the hardware, you have to lay out all the capital expenditures before you can actually put that system into place. And on a unified or on a hosted solution, a cloud-based solution, you don't necessarily have to worry about all of that. You don't have to budget for those large capital expenditures. You can work with those providers to work on flexible billing options. From a scalability perspective, you know, when you're building an on-site solution, you have to build that and buy the amount of hardware and capacity that you need to cover your needs within your solution or within your business. If you go and undersize that device, you may have to actually start all over with another model or another type of on-premise solution if it's not sized for your enterprise correctly. Whereas a hosted solution, scalability is very simple. You know, They're based on larger platforms, and generally they can scale things up within a matter of hours or potentially days, whereas you could be looking at a very long and large and costly project to do it on an on-premise solution. Application adoption, for example. If a new feature comes out and you don't have the hardware that supports that feature, you're going to have to update that hardware. Whereas with a hosted solution, they're always updating and always keeping fresh those different types of components so that when something new comes out, it's relatively easy to upgrade to that new piece or component within that solution. And then obviously, and we've got an additional slide here that we'll go to here, the financial benefits of Opex versus Capex. So before I move to that next slide, do we have any questions or anything that's come in so far?
Nothing in the chat for you.
Okay. I think the what we'll see overall as we go into each of these, and we'll just, show some examples of TCO tools, but your mileage will vary. And so sitting down together with GregCom will be, an exercise to take a look at your individual needs and how that each one of these are major factors in doing that math equation for yourself.
Yep, very true, Tom. So from an Opex over Capex perspective, obviously, again, it depends on the customer, it depends on the end user, it depends on kind of what the business needs are. But in today's day and age, Opex is significantly more attractive to many companies out there because of some of the aspects that I'm pointing out here on this particular slide. So from a Capex perspective, if you're spending your capital expenditure dollars or your budgeted Capex dollars on infrastructure, on things that don't really have revenue generating type returns on them, you're robbing yourself of some of that capability to actually spend that available cash on revenue generating solutions that can actually help the company to either become more efficient or build new solutions or come up with different ways to generate more revenue for that company rather than tying it up in a technology stack that, yes, it's useful for the company. Yes, it provides, different solutions and services. But when it comes to revenue generation, it doesn't really meet the mark for some of the other options that you have to spend money on. From an Opex, from a tax benefits perspective, you can write off 100% of your monthly expenses, your operating expenses, as day-to-day expenses on your taxes. So from a tax perspective, Capex, you can only write off a percentage of that annual spend per year. So obviously you can depreciate and you can write things off annually on a Capex expenditure, but if you're actually turning everything over from an IT perspective to an Opex cost, all of that expense can be written off as a tax expense. Another piece is you pay for what you use in a hosted model, whereas we had talked previously about on-premise type PBX solutions. You have to be careful in what you purchase and how you build that solution because you have to have an understanding of really what it looks like from a usage standpoint within your company. So if you put in a PBX that has a 7-year lifespan, for example, when you put it in, your company may not necessarily have the same type of use case that it does 7 years down the road. With an Opex model, with a hosted model, that hosted model can easily grow with the company as the needs grow. So if you've got a relatively small company and you're looking at at significant growth over the next 5 to 6 to 7 years, it's hard to put in a piece of hardware that can meet all of those needs for the entire 7 years without either overpaying at the beginning or getting caught up in paying for upgrades throughout that time frame. Whereas the flexibility of a hosted solution is you select what you want at the beginning, and as you grow, you continually to grow that in stages with the company. And it's also a good solution for companies with tighter corporate budgets. So if you don't have the Capex to spend, if you don't have a large capital project or a large capital budget, it gives you the ability to get into more leading edge technology without having to spend all of that capital money to get there. Tom, you want to add any color?
Nope, I think we're good.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to show a few of our example TCO analysis. And again, these are all examples. As Tom said previously, your mileage will vary. These really are to give you an idea of what goes into kind of calculating a total cost of ownership to get a good and solid understanding of what really the difference is going to be from an on-premise type solution to a managed hosted type solution. So you can see here that obviously you're looking at your numbers of users, what type of voice setup are you looking at? Do you have IP phones today? Do you not? Is it analog system? Are you doing a complete switch out? Do you have a disaster recovery site? Are you doing any kind of conferencing? So do you have large conference rooms throughout your infrastructure or throughout your building that you would want to have some sort of a conference phone or conferencing capabilities in? Obviously, there's some depreciation factors in there, total cost of conference minutes. So if you're using a conference solution right now, a phone conferencing solution, and you're paying X amount for that solution, how many minutes are you paying for? What's the cost? That type of things. Again, do you have video users? Do you have any kind of messaging users that are included in that component? Are you doing any kind of faxing? If you are, how many fax users are you having? How many FTE hours are you applying to care and feeding and support of the existing solution? And how about upgrades? How do the PBX upgrades fit into your overall plan? So then again, as an example, and these are all kind of made up numbers that we put together, but as an example, these are some comparison numbers. So for example, a PBX and upgrades, if your on-premise cost is going to be $48,000 and your UCAS cost is $151,000, that's not necessarily saving you there, but if you look at maintenance and voice usage and conferencing features and some of the other components here within the comparison, you see that overall, while it may be a little bit more cost effective from a PBX and upgrade perspective, when you factor in all of those other soft and hard costs, now you can really see the value of moving to a hosted solution.
Well, and I think I'll just interject here. I think a big part of this equation is, what does your IT staff look like?
Right.
If you have a large IT staff and they're focused on the voice hardware, then they have the skill set, and you don't need to refocus those skills in other areas of the company. This equation may not work out for you. If you're a one-person shop or you only have two people and one person needs to be redeployed to focus on strategic issues for the company, and this can be outsourced, it could be a massively beneficial equation. So it's one of the most important parts of the entire TCO and ROI analysis is to consider what your own IT staff is doing, how many people there are, and what else they could be doing more
Right.
strategically for the company.
Yep, I was going to add to that you may have a staff that's dedicated to working on support of your PBX or working on support of your infrastructure, but that same group of staff also is responsible for projects. And maybe you've got a project list of 50 projects that aren't getting done because those particular staff folks are working on care and feeding most of the time. This is a good opportunity to look at that and be able to apply those folks. You're not losing headcount. Those folks aren't going to lose a job, but they can be actually focused in a more productive realm to actually help the business, not necessarily just keep the lights on. Lisa, do we have any questions or anything that's come up so far?
Not in the chat feature.
Okay, sounds good. So this next slide is a little bit difficult to read. It's a little bit of an eye chart, but essentially what this is, again, it's an example of a spreadsheet, comparison spreadsheet that you can utilize to look at the different components of the different provider solutions. And it gives you the ability to actually side by side compare each of those components and each of those cost features within the different competing providers out there, so that from a cost perspective, you can do a side-by-side comparison. Now, obviously, these different providers have different features and functionality within their solutions. So going through the discussion with each one of them or whichever providers you choose for a particular solution, it behooves you to go through that and understand from a feature functionality what the differences are. But this gives you an example of what it would look like from a cost perspective. So what I do want to add here is, obviously we've given a couple of examples of different providers in the space, and you're probably asking, well, how do we choose, how do we pick who is right for any particular type of solution? That's where our team comes in. That's where the solutions engineering team from Intelisys and also the team from Greg comes in, from a perspective of sitting down with you and going through that discovery process to understand what your customers' needs are, both from a business and fiscal and support perspective, so that we can help you to pick the right provider for the right customer. So 8x8 may be a great customer, maybe a great provider for a customer that's got 5,000 users, but it may not be necessarily the right provider for a smaller SMB customer that you're looking at maybe 10 or 15 or 20 users. So, and depending on the functionality they're looking for, depending on the compliances that they need, depending on the other requirements that fit into each of those solutions, that's where we can collectively help you to pick those providers and go through that sales process with you. Any questions or concerns? Or Tom, do you want to add anything?
Again, your mileage will vary, and this is just a sample report, which is why it's just a screenshot and small, but it's the kind of example of the analysis that can be done.
Yep, absolutely. So with that finishes off my portion of the presentation. Hopefully, obviously you've all been fairly quiet, but hopefully you've got something out of it. Certainly, if there's any questions that come up now, Lisa, I don't know if you can unmute everybody, but if there's any questions that anybody has with anything that we've covered so far, certainly Tom and I are here to answer any of those, as are, obviously Lisa and some of the other Greg folks that are on the call. Otherwise, we can certainly share contact information, and if there's something that comes up, either in the form of a particular opportunity or any other generic type questions that come along, we're certainly here to answer.
Yeah, and I think Travis, Chris, you guys should be able to unmute yourselves if you do have a question that you wanted to verbalize rather than trying to type it out. Um, so
Right.
feel free to do that. I think, John, that you covered a lot of great information here that's so important to know for companies trying to evaluate what they should do with their current
Mhm.
system from the aspect of, what makes financial sense and from the aspect of staying up to date with current technology. So a lot of good stuff here. If
Excellent.
any questions come to mind after the call, definitely reach out to your Greg account rep. Um, and I guess, John, if you want to scoot to the next slide, if there's
Absolutely.
if there's anyone who does not already have a relationship with a Greg account manager, please contact Dave Laterno via his email or phone number that you see here, and he can make arrangements to get you connected with one of our account managers based on your particular needs. And then, of course, if you do have a Greg account manager, please reach out to that person as a first step.
Whoops. Absolutely.
Okay, well, with that, thank you all for attending the webinar today. A big thank you to Tom and John for sharing all of your knowledge on this topic as well. Always a pleasure to work with such great partners. We really appreciate Intellisys and what you guys do for us.
And in return,
Absolutely.
thank
Thanks
you,
for having
Lisa.
us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all at GregCom. Always a pleasure to partner with you as well.
Okay, and please keep an eye out for the link of the recording of the session. I'll be getting that out to everyone this afternoon. So once again, we appreciate everybody's support and we look forward to working with you all more in the future. So thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.